Sorry, Martin, we're not quite ready to start yet, but we'll be there in a minute, Martin. Okay, Martin, we're ready to start now. Hello and welcome to the 368th episode of The Crate and Crowbar, a podcast about PC gaming. It is May the 7th. I'm Alex Wiltshire, and tonight I'm joined by Tom Senior.
Hello.
And Graham Smith.
Hello.
And let's talk about some video games on the PC platform.
You first.
I've spent the last week being very entertained about a big thing going on about video games on another platform entirely, but which looks like it'll affect all video games and all platforms. Yes, it's the Apple versus Epic Jamboree, which is going on at the moment. It's been enormously fun so far.
It's been good for gossip, hasn't it? That's
It
what
really
it feels
has.
like. Secrets spilling out.
All over the place. Mostly, one of the things I'm enjoying thinking about is just how unhappy all the third parties involved must be at this data kind of spilling out. And actually, and more on a more serious note, a lot of sort of smaller developers, data coming out about their sales and relationships with things like, one of the things that came out was the amount of money given to the developers of games released for free on the Epic Game Store. The number of downloads, the number of acquisitions, the kind of percentage of new users per acquisition rate divided by the cost, those kind of things. It's totally fascinating data, but I'd imagine I would not be very happy about any of it being divulged.
Do you think it actually matters, though? Like, I feel like there's a lot of default knee-jerk secrecy in the games industry. Like, does it hurt any of those indie devs, especially where they don't have stockholders, they don't have a stock price to worry about? Does it actually hurt them in any material way that people now know those figures?
Yeah, probably not. It's I'd say if I was there, I would say it's fine if I made the choice to make it public. I don't feel comfortable about one of the very few people who've had those numbers made public. If it was everybody, then it's fine. It's like being on a nudist beach, everyone's naked. It's fine. But if you're the only naked person on a normal beach, you're probably not, and you didn't want to be naked, you probably wouldn't be that happy.
This is true. I can imagine that situation.
But
some internal kind of wrangling. If a developer was expected to make more money than they eventually did, then they might look at to what extent the game was advertised in the Epic Store, where it appeared on the store, and I could see it kicking off loads of things like that. It's kind of nitty-gritty problems like that, and also maybe if some of those studios and some of those people who made those games wanted to attract funding from external sources in future, and they look at this and say, "Oh, this thing didn't sell very well," then that it's going to have a knock-on effect for future projects potentially. So yeah, I think there's lots of reasons to keep it secret.
Yeah, and I wonder how much kind of kicking selves there was kind of when you look at some of these sort of like wild. I mean, I think a lot of it actually, it looks wild on paper, but you kind of then look at the situation. So with the Epic Game Store, you have examples like Fez, 2.5 million entitlements, which is the downloads of Fez, and they were sold for $75,000, and Epic got 107,000 new accounts off the back of that. But for 75,000, it's kind of crazy. And then you got Mutant Year Zero, which had 3 million entitlements, but was sold to developer for $1 million. So a very large amount more, and the number of new accounts based on that were 197,000. So only double the amount, but a lot more money was paid on it. But when you kind of think about it, well, Fez had been out for a very long time by that point. Mutant Year Zero hadn't been out for that long, so this is August 2019. I can't remember when that came out. Probably it wasn't actually. Well, definitely wasn't launch, but it wouldn't have been that. It wouldn't have been out for very long by that point. But kind of very wildly fluctuating figures. But that's kind of one of the things I wonder whether, like, some people kind of felt that. I mean, actually, yeah, one of them, everything that the kind of the surrealistic David O'Reilly game where you can play as an elephant or a rock or a car or whatever the hell it was, zooming in and out of this kind of landscapes, in and out landscapes and things at scales. That was the buyout price was $200,000, but the number of new Epic accounts there was for 35,000, which makes it one of the larger kind of cost per user acquisition cost things on the scale. But like, it's interesting. It's wildly. I don't know quite what all the For Honor one as well. That was crazy.
The thing is, you look at the figures though, and even for everything, which was the highest, the user acquisition cost is pretty low. Like compared to what like Deliveroo and Uber and these sorts of companies often say is their user acquisition costs when Figure comes out. Epic's not spending that much money. Like free games are a really good way to get users to sign up versus podcast advertising forever and ever and ever, trying to get people to sign up to Squarespace, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was $11.5 million between December 2018 and end of September 2019. So, it isn't, for the number of new accounts, which came to 5 million, it's not too bad, I would say. Yeah, on that basis, when you think about what mobile game publishers are spending in user acquisition.
Yeah, and Epic probably have some stat that says that of those users, X amount of them go on to spend $20, $30 on the store buying a game, which they probably wouldn't have done if they hadn't already signed up for an account.
Yeah.
And so, instantly, if it's only costing them $2 to $4 or whatever per user, then a single purchase, they make their money back.
Yeah, yeah.
There was the other figure, though, that came out that makes these figures even more irrelevant, was that Fortnite, in its first 2 years of existence, has made over $9 billion. I think it made just over $5 billion in its first year, 4-something billion in its second, and then in 2020 made another $5 billion. It went back up again. And now, like, that last one was most interesting to me because it felt like 2020 was the year when Fortnite stopped feeling like such a big phenomenon. But actually, it made more money than ever that year.
Yeah,
and that's just an insane amount of money. And like you put the other figures, like I think they've spent like, was it like $400 million or something like that on the Epic Games Store? And a lot of that was securing exclusives rather than the free games we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
But even if you add all those numbers together, it doesn't get anywhere close to the $9 billion that they made over 2 years from Fortnite alone. And then on top of that, they've got revenue from
the Epic engine.
Unreal Engine. Yeah, Unreal Engine, and then the other companies they've bought, like Rocket League and all that sort of stuff, which made I think all those games combined made about $108 million. I think it was.
Yeah.
Which is not that much, but that's all. It's all paying for itself and making profit and stuff like that.
Yeah, Epic's going to start launching real life spaceships, and then Tim Sweeney's going to host Saturday Night Live, and that's our future.
I mean, I think when we think about kind of this sort of this war in the courts between Apple and Epic, I want them both to lose a bit. It's all pretty bad. Like Epic, I'm I admire them greatly, and that they are doing things that are good for games in general. Like the the what they're trying to do with some aspects of what they're sort of opening up game stores and charging developers less money for less percentage of revenue. These are good things in general. At the same and the Unreal Engine is an amazing piece of technology, which is being new, incredibly powerful tools are being bolted onto it all the time. We talked last week or maybe the week before about MetaHuman Creator, which is, if you're making a game in Unreal Engine, you can use it. You can, if you, for a lot of developers, especially at indie level, you don't have to pay anything at all to release a game and make money off it, to a certain kind of, up to a certain bracket. These are good things. At the same time, it is terrifying that one company right now is sitting in such a place of power across, a game store, which isn't the biggest in PC gaming by a long shot, but looks like it will only gain momentum. Unreal Engine is currently, the leading engine. The tool set is so rich and so powerful that if I was a developer, that would be my default choice, and there'd have to be a very good reason not to use it. When they sit and they're making one of the most important games across all of video games in Fortnite, that power frightens me, and I feel very mixed about it, essentially.
I mean,
but having said that, I'm going to undermine what I just said, actually, though, in the sense that, because when you look at Fortnite, another interesting stat, the average monthly Fortnite gross revenue between January 19 and July 2020, PlayStation led that by a long way, $148 million per week, per month, gross revenue came through the PlayStation, followed by the Xbox at 82 million, Switch half of that at 40 million, PC all the way back at 27 million. So Epic, while being this behemoth, are still very much have to play by the big platform holders' rules. Nintendo, Microsoft, and particularly Sony. So I don't know,
but that's what they're trying to change with this lawsuit. This is why they're
sure.
suing Apple, and this will set precedent that will affect what Sony are allowed to do with their store, and so on and so on. And so, I mean, they, like you described Epic as being, essentially at risk of becoming a monopoly, and certainly they are in the development of games. But they are tackling these companies which are definitely already monopolies.
Yeah.
Including Steam, which is like the monopoly that gamers seem to love and think of as their best mate, run by friendly Uncle Gabe. But it has enormous power, and it wields that power in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, just as a sort of like an offshoot of that, of course, David Rosen, who is the founder of Wallfire Games, who made Overgrowth, has just actually put a lawsuit on Valve about it's an antitrust lawsuit in relation to the fact that he is unable to sell his games, Wallfire's games, on any other storefront lower price than on Steam, which is, well, we'll find out whether that it's illegal or not. But there's a sort of, it feels like a big steamroller of uprising against big platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about that last week. But like David Rosen's other thing is that he's also the co-founder of Humble,
Right.
Which is a digital storefront that sells predominantly Steam keys, and so he's got various different stakes in the game. It feels like.
Yeah.
Humble, actually, I mean, this is another offshoot of an offshoot, but Humble, I don't know if you saw, but they announced a couple of weeks ago that they were going to get rid of the sliders on Humble bundles that let you define what amount of money you sent to the publisher versus the developer versus the charity, and replace the sliders with 2 buttons that would let you just donate either 5 or 15% to charity with like 2 fixed rates, basically. And you had to give at least some money to Humble and the lion's share to the publisher. They've just gone back on that, though. Like, we talked about that last week, so I wanted to mention the fact that they've gone back, they've apologized, they said they're going to bring the sliders back. Maybe not in this exact same form as before, but they are currently back on the site.
That's good.
But yeah, it feels like it's all change. And like, there's loads of other stuff that's come out of this Apple versus Epic case, and a lot of it is just funny because there's just an oddity to it. First, like, from the judge that obviously is not overly familiar with the video games industry and is somewhat baffled and exhausted by it all after only 5 days of what's a 3-week case. But also stuff like they've had to define a lot of the terms that they're discussing, including stuff like what is a console. And so there's been like these surreal moments during the case over the past week where you've got Tim Sweeney, who runs a video game company, being asked if he can point out a PlayStation. And then yesterday's thing was them being, both Apple and Epic being asked to define what a video game was, because essentially, like, it matters as to the outcome of the case. But part of, we didn't actually say what the case was about. Part of it is that Fortnite, they want to be able to sell like subscriptions and advertise their own service within Apple's store without Apple either stopping them from doing that advertising or taking a cut of every subscription. And so they've been pointing at Roblox, which is a game that's sold on there where Apple don't take a cut of everything that happens within Roblox. And so Apple have been making the argument that Roblox is a game, but the games you play within Roblox are not games. And
I mean, that would be true for quite a lot of Roblox games, but
but they were getting down to the point of, like, there was a person from Apple who was, I think they were from Apple, but they were trying to define a video game and saying that a game is something that has a beginning, an end, and challenge. Those were the 3 points that apparently defined a video game.
Nope.
Which, yeah, no.
Nope.
Not a great description.
I think our listeners are going to challenge us to do this now, which is the point where we kick the can down the road and talk about any other news that's been happening. Some more positive news. Well, actually, the news we just discussed isn't really positive or negative, which is quite funny and interesting. But the IGF nominations have just been announced, and yeah, we've been looking over them. There's some good games in there, and some games that Marsh doesn't like.
Yeah, so like the Seamus McNally Grand Prize, which is the big one, the nominees are Paradise Killer, Teardown, Chicory, A Colourful Tale, Genesis Noir, the game that I guess Marsh doesn't like, Umurangi Generation, and Spiritfarer. Do you agree with that? Those the 6 best independent games released over the last 12 months?
Teardown's good.
Yeah, Teardown's good. I like Paradise Killer as well. I'm not sure it's like terribly. I mean, it shows McNally Grand Prizes. There's supposed to be some innovation to it, isn't there? Or is it just sort of? I'm just trying to figure out how it's defined, really, like what it's supposed to celebrate.
It's kind of just like the overall best, I think, is the grand prize. So
Yeah.
like,
Right.
Because there's still the Nuovo. Yeah, there's the Nuovo Award, which is specifically for like innovative or weird things. But the grand prize is just. I mean, I guess this is a debate that's probably eternal, but it feels to me like it's just, hey, this is great.
Yeah, it's nice. The thing I always like about the IGF is that it does tend to put like quite different games together in the grand prize category. So seeing Paradise Killer next to Teardown, it's like there's completely different games, completely different objectives, totally different experiences. And how do you say that one is better than the other? Which is the classic problem. I think Teardown's probably better personally, but then it's just going to come down to some people who really love a good murder mystery and a good kind of adventure game spirit set in an unusual world might like Paradise Killer better.
I'm enjoying. I would enjoy seeing the discussion about that one, because that one's definitely about, it's going to come down to what you value, and I think that's always interesting. You have a set of people, and those, that's a real good test of, hey, what do you want games to be? Do you want them to be open-ended fun boxes, but which don't want to say anything about the world, and have lots of rough edges, but often the fun exists on those rough edges? Or do you want something that is brash and sort of mechanically kind of wanting to do exciting things and to present characters and storytelling, blah, 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 all the stuff that Paradise Killer does? And I'd like to see that. I would like to experience that argument.
Yeah, I'd like to celebrate the IGF description of Spiritfarer, which is the most indie game description of an indie game you could ever hope to indie game. The first sentence is, Spiritfarer is a cozy management game about dying.
I believe it's very good, though.
It's supposed to be great. Yeah, I heard.
Really close to playing it a lot of times, but I just haven't got around to it.
That's kind of the best thing about awards for me, actually, is that it's sort of nudging me, saying, "Hey, loads of people think this is great, and you forgot about it completely. So off you go, have a play through this list and get all these experiences. They're going to be good in some way, hopefully."
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that's the key value of the IGF now. Like, there are so many games, and something that just kind of like points a laser focus on a set number of them and says, these ones are worth like paying attention to. But I think the grand prize is a good selection of things. Like Umurangi Generation and Spiritfarer are both great games as well. And like, there's nothing that came out over the past year that I'm like, oh, I can't believe that didn't get a nomination.
Yeah. But the process behind the IGF is pretty solid, I would say. Can we talk about it? Because you and I have been involved at the kind of the early stage. Can we talk about it?
I don't think it's secret. I don't think we're sworn to secrecy.
So about, I think, 300 people are invited to be in the first round of the process, which is essentially a big Hoover operation, where all of the games that have been entered into the awards are given out firstly at random, spread out across all these 300 people. Once you as one of those people has played, I think, sort of, 6 or 10 of them or something, you can start picking any game that you like from that list and play them. There is an internal forum, kind of message boardy forum-y thing, where you can have discussions about individual games with the other judges, and some cool conversations on there. Actually, lots of people have interesting things to say. There's a little bit of interesting to watch one-upmanship going on. There are some real blowhards who always like to put an opinion out, whether that needs to be aired or not. That's always fun. A lot of people who have problems you getting codes to work and things. But by and large, like, the discussions for each game are really fun and interesting, and you can sort of really get into them if you like. You can kind of browse it to sort of see what's around. It's a really kind of great source of, oh heck, like, I didn't realize this came out in the past year or whatever. That's stage one, and from that list, as a judge, what you're fundamentally doing is, for each of the games that you're given, you're choosing whether you think it should be presented to the jury as one of the nominations. I think it is pure voting. So if you vote for something to go in there, it's the games that have the most votes go forward into the nomination phase. Is that right?
Something like that. Yeah, I don't know exactly how the numbers behind it all work, but yeah, my understanding is that we're basically just making recommendations for what the jurors should pay attention to before they select the specific nomination lists and the ultimate winners.
And it's neatly done, so that if you're and I know that you used to be able to play anything you liked at the very start. Like, you could get access to any of the games, even before you've made any recommendations of games that you've been actually sort of given as a list. Now you have to do a number of votes before you can do that, which means that you don't get the situation where the big hitter games get all the votes because that's what people are wanting to play, because that's what they seeked out, and they didn't get around to playing the ones they'd actually been given. And that's a good idea, because you kind of get the most of both worlds, which is, you want the important games to have eyes on them, but you also need to ensure that there aren't any forgotten gems, that have been missed out. I think it broadly works.
Yeah, I think there are good examples of it working over the past few years. Like this year, obviously, there's a lot of discussion around Spelunky 2, for example, because that's a big indie game that came out over the past year, and a lot of people have played it over the last 12 months, and so that will instantly have a bunch of conversation and people voting for it or proclaiming that they're not going to vote for it for whatever reason, and that's fine, that's valid. But if you look back over the last few years, there's always games in the IGF that get to the stage of being nominated, despite the fact that most people haven't heard of them. Like, they just get discovered almost through the process of the judges going through the IGF. Like, the most obvious one is Outer Wilds, when that was like a student project, which I think ultimately won the grand prize like 4 or 5 years ago. But at that point, no one had heard of that game. Like, it wasn't available anywhere really, or like it was just a free download on their website or something. But through the IGF process, it got elevated, and more people commented on it, so more and more people played it, and everyone who played it loved it, and so it kind of rose to the top in that good way. And there's other examples, like even in like just scanning through the list for this year, is like, I think Rainy Season is a good example, which is in the best student game nominations, which is like made by a single person, takes you about 40 minutes to play it. It's been up on Steam, but it's not like a big game that's had a load of attention or a load of press coverage or anything like that. But people in the IGF have still found it and championed it, and it's done well enough to get a nomination.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to get stuff like Blaze Ball in the Nuovo category, which is very fun.
What? I haven't looked at the list. I got to look. What? Really?
Yep.
What? Oh,
We think of something else. It's the horror baseball.
I was thinking, the baseball thing, which is really fun. I did notice that, and I was going to ask whether either of you played it. I thought you said it meant BlazBlue, the Japanese fighting game.
That would be amazing.
It would be amazing.
I voted for it 10,000 times. It's not an indie game. It wasn't released this year.
So have you done baseball? Have you played it?
I haven't played it. I've really enjoyed it, sort of via other people's cryptic tweets about it, and sort of like other people who have written about it. I kind of don't want to play it because it was ruining the mystery, but it sounds like a very bizarre mashup of things. It's kind of like a shared gambling sport with fake money, but also a sort of sports sim, but it's also mostly a horror game as well. I mean, what a combination of things. It's really strange.
Yeah, I've been obviously also really intrigued, but it looks like it needs quite a lot of time invested in it, which it's kind of frightened me off a little bit, just to understand what's going on, but then to actually play it after that point.
I was surprised it didn't get an excellence in narrative nomination, because it seems like that's what people were really excited about by it last year, was the kind of co-authored story that was between the developers and the community. But then I suppose at the same time, maybe that makes it difficult to nominate, because it's such a non-traditional story and not one strictly created or shaped. Like it mostly exists in wikis written by fans and in tweets and in fan fiction and that sort of stuff. And then some of it gets incorporated via like in-game votes and stuff like that as they change the rules based on these stories that they're coming up with, which is like phenomenal and what's so exciting about it. But yeah, do you credit the developers with that?
You absolutely do, totally,
as well.
Because they've created an environment in which inspires that stuff, and it might be somewhat by accident, but they've clearly recognised that propensity and encouraged it and built on it. That seems totally down to the developers to me.
Yeah. Which is why I'm surprised it's not nominated for that. It gets an honourable mention for narrative.
Well, that's bullshit.
That's the other thing that award lists do. And then you go, that's bullshit about 3 times. By the time
Yes,
you
we
get
found it.
Good.
What you been playing, Tom?
I've been playing that Resident Evil Village, also known as Resident Evil 8, a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7, which had nothing to do with Resident Evil 6. But in case anyone's keeping count, this is like a first-person horror game. It's more of like it's got a much larger, more expansive world than 7, which was set in very claustrophobic houses and outhouses and small outside gardens and bits of, cave systems and things like that. This is, as is implied in the title, has an entire village to explore and get murdered in by various gothic monsters. It's set in, quote, Europe, unquote.
This sounds like Resident Evil. This is Resident Evil 4. All of those things are Resident Evil 4.
That's very true. I was going to compare it unfavorably to Resident Evil 4, actually, in some ways. I'm going to stay away from like story specifics or anything like that because it came out literally on Thursday this week, and this podcast coming out on Saturday, so loads of people haven't played it yet. But it finds itself stranded in between a few different kind of archetypal Resident Evil games. So 7 was a brilliant horror game. Like, it's genuinely really scary. It's set in Louisiana. It's kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibe to it. There's this warped family stalking the corridors of this incredibly confusing claustrophobic labyrinth of rotting corridors. And it just gets more and more intense and more horrible as you go through it. Combat is desperate. You hardly have any ammo. And one enemy is a huge deal, and you do anything to avoid them or get around them somehow rather than actually face them. But the Resident Evil series can be that. It can also be an action game, like Resident Evil 4, which is a huge shift for the series and widely celebrated as being one of the greatest game of its generation. Over-the-shoulder camera, third-person shooter, and the very first village you go into in deepest, darkest Europe is you immediately swarmed by loads and loads of enemies who are very difficult to... Yes, the combat in that game is very desperate. You're shooting at their legs so that they go down so that you can back away, reload, and then desperately fill them with a few more rounds, ideally to the head. Bits coming off people, huge, enormous men with chainsaws running after you and cleaving you in half, one hit. It's terrifying stuff, and there's a fantastic kind of roaming battle through a small town at the very start of Resident Evil 4, and it just sort of escalates from there, really, including giant crocodiles, giant monsters is another Resident Evil thing. And Resident Evil 8 kind of leans into that direction for the series, in that it's more of an open environment. The environments are full of enemies, but the combat is inexplicably rubbish. And the reason this is so surprising is because it's good in Resident Evil 7. It's really well balanced. Enemies react realistically to your bullets, which feel very powerful when you shoot them. Resident Evil 4, which spawned 5 and 6, had similar localized damage systems where you shoot out their legs, and different enemies respond in different surprising ways. Like, you might shoot one type of enemy's head off and it will explode in a series of writhing tentacles and then charge you. And up to that point, you've been headshotting things quite traditionally, and then the game will suddenly surprise you, and it's really well paced in the way that it introduces these new surprises and keeps you on your toes. Resident Evil 8, the guns feel absolutely useless. The enemies barely react at all to being shot. You can kill them with headshots and then their heads will explode, but you can't shoot their legs out or anything like that. The guns sound crap, and there's no kind of sense of recoil or power to them at all. And it's just a really huge and surprising failure of the game, because even the remake of Resident Evil 2 has brilliant guns. And actually dealing with enemies in Resident Evil 2 is a really interesting challenge because they're persistent. You shoot the legs off one zombie in a corridor and come back to that same corridor half an hour later, all the enemies will exist in the state that you left them. So they'll still be crawling around with their hands if you've cut them in half, for example. And they're really difficult to kill, and ammo is really scarce. Again, that kind of pros and cons of ammo management, resource management. But crafting stuff in this game is trivial. You find ammo everywhere in just random jars. It massively stretches the degree to which mixing a herb with a chemical can heal things that happen to you. And I won't give specifics, but it gets ridiculous very quickly. In fact, the entire game gets ridiculous very quickly. which Resident Evil 4 does as well, because Resident Evil can be very kind of schlocky gothic horror if it wants to be, and have ridiculous villains and ridiculous bosses. But it's so incongruous to a game that is a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7, which is a totally different type of game, as far as I can tell, like in terms of the way it's balanced, the way it wants to make you feel, the way it's structured. And I just find it baffling. I don't know what to make of it. And it's also just got some absolutely bullshit sections in it. Like quite early on, you're being chased down a cave through a cave system, then you fall into a room, and the ceiling is spikes, and the spikes are coming down, and you have to find a way out of the room in 30 seconds. And what that means is just running around the edge until you see a press X button prompt, at which point you rip out some wood that looks exactly like the wood in the rest of the room, and then you escape to the next room. There are more spikes, and if you fail, you have to go right back to the start of it, and you keep edging your way forwards in this trial and error, ridiculous kind of gauntlet until you've eventually done it. And it's not scary, it's not tense, it's extremely annoying, and I can't believe it's in a game in 2021. I can't believe that section doesn't just go to the cutting room floor. Like as soon as someone says, "Hey, what about if we have the player just slide down into a series of spiked trap rooms where there are no lights, and they have to sort of guess at which way to go next. And if they lose, they go all the way back to the start. Isn't that scary?" No, it's rubbish. It's widely known that sort of sequence is rubbish, and it's been rubbish for like 15 years now. And that's just to be dropped in the place of as though it's supposed to excite you or supposed to be scary. And there's no real sense of threat to the game at all. Like, even though incredibly violent things happen to you personally and to people around you, like there's no sense that the enemies are so kind of typical and played out that there's no sense of fear to them. So look at Resident Evil 4. Like all the villagers you fight in Resident Evil 4 at the very start, they look like normal people. Admittedly, they're sort of groaning and they sort of seem to be out of their minds, but they seem completely normal. It's not until tentacles start exploding out of them at random that you kind of get a sense there's something really supernatural about them. Yeah. And that's actually an unusual enemy archetype, and something that's actually a good sense of body horror to it, and the way it reveals it slowly over time is really, really smart. And there's absolutely none of that. It's like, oh, you fight werewolf dudes very, very, very quickly into the game. And
it just feels like it should be a reveal.
Yeah, slightly hairier men as well. And what they very, very slowly walk at you, or you shoot them in the chest over and over again, and they don't flinch, and then they fall over, go, ugh, and then you loot them for coins. And there's it just does. The secret sauce that made Resi 4 and Resi 7 brilliant is totally absent from this game. And I think it's stranded between the two games actually. So it doesn't
really. You don't feel it's kind of offering something new then?
No, I don't. Especially the way it just leans on very, very typical, like, oh, what would you expect to see in a European Gothic setting? Oh, werewolves, vampires, creaky things. Yeah, no surprises there at all. There's a milky-eyed witch who walks around humming, talking nonsense about dark-winged angels and stuff like that. It's just like I've seen it all before. It's like a theme park. It's like like a theme park ride that feels like it has to tick a load of boxes. And with the exception of stuff like Lady Dimitrescu, I think her name is. She's the super tall woman who fascinated the internet for some reason. Weirdly,
it's continuing to apparently.
She's like an interesting character actually. Like she's the most unusual character in it so far, and actually one of the few characters that sort of bucks the trend of the typical monsters you'd expect to find in such a setting. But that's the one standout thing, and I think there's some interesting stuff to be written about why that particular character has captivated people so much. I don't quite understand it, but anyway, yeah. So sorry, I just
it's because she's very tall, Tom.
She's very tall, but then everyone in Bloodborne is very tall, and no one's written love letters to the really, really tall werewolves of Bloodborne.
Are they big ladies?
Yeah, I think that the lady aspect is going to be an important
definitely,
aspect.
Yeah, for sure. She's the only tall lady I've seen so far. She's very tall though, very menacing. So yeah, maybe it gets better. I've only played like the first 2.5, 3 hours. I've heard that it gets more and more strange as it goes on.
Yeah, most of the reviews say it gets worse. Most of the reviews.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Most of the reviews say the first half's really good and the second half is nuts. And so, like, you're bucking the consensus by disliking it right from the off.
Yeah.
Although
I might love the second half.
that's not me. That's not me disagreeing, because I played 45 minutes of it and gave up for all of the reasons that you just pointed out from having played the first 3 hours. Like, I got to that first village and there were 4 faintly wolfy men kind of like coming after me. And I think horror games are really difficult to make, because video games ultimately want you to progress. They want you to finish them and see all the stuff that they've made, but they have to convince you that you're in this really scary, dangerous situation. And like, it was early enough in the game with these wolf guys, I'm like, I don't know if I should be running away from them. I don't know if I should be trying to kill them. I don't have very much ammo, so I feel bad with every bullet I'm firing. Like, I'm anxious about the fact that am I going to find any more ammo? If I use all my ammo, am I going to be out of ammo for the next hour? That's just an unpleasant experience. Shooting them feels bad, because, like you say, they don't really react, and even shooting them in the head seems to take at least like 3 or 4 shots for them to go down, and it's like 6 or 7 or 8 if you're shooting them in the body. And then, like, pretty quickly, like, I didn't know where to go. I was being followed by 4 wolfmen, but if I just kind of lightly jogged in front of them, they couldn't ever catch up with me. If I stopped to try and fight them, it was really awkward and felt bad. I think they can do like 2 or 3 attacks of like biting at your neck before you die. And once I died the first time, any remaining threat that I felt was gone completely. And so I was like, oh man, this entire fantasy and tension and horror of this experience is gone. It's fallen apart. It just looks really ropey and it feels bad, and I feel anxious playing it. Like, anxious rather than afraid. Like, I'm okay with horror games making me feel afraid. That's what I want. But this just kind of, I feel like I'm I'm throwing pound coins down a drain. That's how I feel when I'm firing bullets. Of like this kind of drain. Oh, I probably should keep these. And so after 45 minutes, I just stopped. I probably won't go back to it now.
No, I wouldn't recommend it, because it's. I mean, ammo. It turns out it isn't scarce, and it's easily crafted and easily found if someone who smashed enough pots. Which just, that anxiety you feel, I mean, that goes away almost immediately after the first section. And also, as you say about the regular attack patterns, it means that I handle 90% of the enemies with the knife now, because I know when to go in and hit them twice and back off and hold L1, which is the block button, which repels most of their attacks. So it's just like wading through mud. And it's just lacking any sort of sense of threat or danger.
It's so interesting how many things, there are so many echoes of Resi 4 in that description, or both of those descriptions, in the sense that its enemies in the village, the start, those villages are slow as well. You can run away from them at a jog if you want to. The ammo is scarce, but that was a stunning sequence. Just the most frantic, surprising, creative. Like you could handle it in so many different ways, or at least it feels that way. And I think it really is true as well. There are so many places you can go that you can, do I try and hold up in the upper room of a house, or do I just run and try to fight? There's so many options. But I think that it's born with like the number of different attacks that the enemies, those villagers, make. They might be meleeing you, they might run at you, they may throw stuff or fire things from a distance. They might come by and you think you're all right, but then a tentacle bursts from their head, and then suddenly they've got this incredible range and very, very powerful attack at that. That is a fantastically dynamic setting with all these different sort of, like a main street, which is really open. There are these side areas, with these alleyways going between the buildings. You can go inside all the buildings. In some of the buildings, there's a shotgun in one of them upstairs. If you go upstairs, they'll go over the rooftops at you. They'll come up the stairs. They'll smash through the windows. Like, it's not that dynamic in 7 and 8 then.
no, it's nowhere close. And I think like the fact that that experience has existed in the series, and it feels, if you were to write them, both those opening sections down on paper, they would sound similar. But for like that combat system was good enough to support an entire survival mode that was actually really good, where you get to play loads of different characters. As you say, the variety of enemies and how varied the AI was made it possible to have waves of different types of things coming at you in different combinations. And in Resident Evil 4, they flank you, and they don't flank you by sort of vanishing around a corner and then spawning somewhere to the side of you. It's just three of them in front of you. Two of them will just move slowly to either side of you. There's so much to be written about, like the carefully tuned turning circle your character has while aiming, while not aiming, and how it's like the movement in Resi 4 is slightly, it's not clunky, but there's
awkward.
slowness
like
to it. It's awkward.
You feel like
you're
a
always
human.
managing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So you're not slipping and sliding all over the place and bunny hopping. It's like you really feel like you're struggling and holding off the hordes all the time. And that.
Oh, do they do? So do they have like a when you're aiming? Do they dodge your bullet or try to dodge your bullet slightly, like the villagers do in 4?
They've got random dodge animations, but they don't seem to be relevant. I've not noticed them actually actively dodging out the way when I actually point a gun at their heads.
See, that's one of these like
that's a good one.
Chilling things in 4.
So it knows.
Yeah,
it knows it's in a game. The games are incomparable. But the thing is, the game like 7 never invites that comparison because it's such a dedicated horror. It looks like something like Outlast, but Outlast is actually very prescriptive with its scares, whereas I think Resident Evil 7 and the remake of Resident Evil 2 are much more systemic in terms of the different ways that combat can turn out and how you choose to run and when you choose to fight. Those decisions feel much more impactful, and you're just as Graham says, like you can take loads of hits. You take ridiculous injuries that you just brush off. Like the game tells you loud and clear in the first hour that your character could just sort of put chemical water on himself and be fine in almost any circumstance. That point, it's like, what?
Yeah, that was the other place where the whole experience fell apart for me. Like I no longer believed in it because of the character's reactions to things, both in cutscenes and out of cutscenes. I don't think it's a spoiler or anything to say that he has a part of his hand bitten off.
Yes.
In a scripted moment in like the first half hour, and he gets up and he just kind of goes, oh, "What the?" And then that's it. And then, and then that's it. He just gets on with it, and you're just like, "What?" I'm sitting here going, "What the hell? What? That's your reaction? You've got 2 fewer fingers on your hand than you had a moment ago." What? Like
his reactions are so weird throughout, and the script is, like the writing is terrible. It's a bit meet a villager who meets a bad end, and he screams down at them. He screams, "Why does everyone keep dying on me?" It's like, what? Who are you talking to? Like, what? You're in a village full of monsters. You're
who you were killing?
The person you just met. Yeah, who you're killing. I'll explain in the break because I don't want to spoil it for people who are actually going to play this. But even more ridiculous things happen to you that you just solve with magic herb water. It's ridiculous. I'm kind of curious to see. I'll play it a little bit more because the environment's quite nice. And actually, the bits where I'm just not fighting anything and I'm just picking up, the classic Resident Evil thing, picking up red keys for red locks, and exploring a opulent castle. That's quite nice. But there's no way I'm going to get my money out of it. That's for sure. So yeah, I mean, I feel like also if it does get ridiculous in the second half, I might enjoy that more. So I'm going to stick it out and see what happens. Alex, what have you been playing?
I've been playing another Japanese, very long-running series. The latest game in that sentence was all the wrong way around. My words are very scrambled egg tonight. God, I can't speak tonight. I've been playing R-Type Final 2, which is a very scrambled egg title as it goes. This is the latest. And a game that nobody thought would ever exist in the very long-running R-Type series, which was kicked off by a company called IRM back in the late 80s. Scrolling shooter from left to right. and this is kind of it's developed by a company called Granzella, which is where some employees from Irem left to found at some point in the last decade or so, I think. And they wanted to make the last R-Type game. They took it to crowdfunding, which it succeeded well. And then made it. The thing is that as you'd expect, that the game that came directly before this, which came out on PS2, I don't know actually when, during the noughties, I guess, that was called R-Type Final. And it was called that because it was meant to be the final game. So this is, so I think actually with tongue in cheek, this is called Final 2. I don't know where you can take the series after this one. But it's a faithful R-Type game, and that's a cool thing because R-Type is like, have either of you played R-Type?
No.
Yes, I played the. I was going to say I played the original R-Type, but maybe it wasn't actually. But I played R-Type on the Amiga 500 in the early 90s.
Yeah. So that would have been a port of R-Type. I should clarify that I am bad at this game, and I've been bad at all of the R-Type games, and I haven't played R-Type Final or any of the. I've only ever played the kind of the older ones. Anything in 3D. This is my first 3D version. They're all fundamentally the same game though, and I'm terrible at them. But this series. Its cool thing is that it is fundamentally like a puzzle solving game, or at least it's very deliberate. Like, you move quite slowly in this. It scrolls quite slowly. There aren't that number of bullets on screen at any one point. But everything is a bit of a challenge, like is a challenge to take down in general. And you have to think your way through stuff in the way that it's positioned and what your ship's capabilities are. So you're this funny little bug-shaped little ship, very cool looking ship actually, and you are going against the Bydos Empire, which is sort of like the famous thing about the first one is that sort of you're in this kind of very mechanical ship, and the levels you go through become increasingly organic as time goes on. The enemies you're up against are kind of like these weird kind of deformed creatures and sort of I don't know, organic shapes, which was very cool for the time because like old graphics couldn't really do that kind of thing that well. It looked amazing, but that's the thing about this one. When it went to 3D, it was kind of, that was the first 3D one was on PlayStation, and the low resolution gave it a little bit of magic, I think. Kind of, it's sort of everything, I don't know, it just looked stunning for the time. I didn't play it, but I saw it in screenshots and things. R-Type Final 2 is obviously on modern displays, and I think modern resolutions are kind of pitiless to this kind of game. It's made in Unreal Engine. Everything is shiny in a not particularly nice way. Sometimes the lights and explosions are really great, like the way that the shadows are suddenly cast by explosions and kind of these flared sort of blasts going across the screen and things. They can look really good. And other times, because things are reflective for lights from light sources coming from a ship, for example, it can look really odd when something in the background is meant to be organic and it's just too shiny. It's a little bit too clean and things, and that really did put me off to start with because it looked like that. It's all scrolls very, very neatly and things and very smoothly, and it's wonderfully made, but it's not doesn't have much of a magic to it. However, I've started playing it, and I warned you I'm really bad at it, and I haven't really managed to progress past the second area, which is really bad. And that's mostly for me is because it has a problem that I think for me with a lot of shooter games have, which is that over the course of a run or like of a life, you'll collect power-ups, and when you die, you lose all those power-ups. And R-Type is a game which is checkpointed, and it will return you to the nearest checkpoint, which is good because you don't have to go back to the start of the level. But it's bad because you don't have any of the power-ups you had. And so suddenly you can be steamrollering a level and, have an incredibly, amazingly, cathartically powerful ship, and then die to a single bullet that you didn't notice. And then it's a slog, and it's very easy just not to be able to catch back up again. Now, like, the designers have obviously borne that in mind. You will get power-ups soon after restarting at a checkpoint. But at my skill level, the jolt between a good run and then dying and then suddenly a roadblock and I just can't get past an area is difficult to bear, and it's frustrating for me. I think, obviously this is this has existed in R-Type and in lots of other shooters for decades. So it works for a lot of players and it works for the genre in many ways, I guess. But yeah, it's a pain in the ass. But when I am enjoying it, like, the detail of this game is absurd. So I think, so Final 1 had, I think, 120 ships or something in it. And I think that R-Type Final 2 has a similar thing. And the ships all look broadly the same, but they all are different experiments in the kinds of guns that you can get in a shooter game. The default and the starter ship is the one that you have all the way through the early R-Type, and it's called the R9A Arrowhead, and it has like a sort of a little bleepy laser that comes out the front, and you can hold that down and it will release a really powerful charge shot, and it has homing missiles that you can pick up if you get the right pickups. The other thing about R-Type is that you get the force, which is a spherical thing, little kind of shippy bit that flies, or that will come onto the screen, and you can pick it up by flying into it, and you'll latch onto either the back of your ship or the front of your ship, and that will now act as a shield for bullets that hit you from that direction, and will also fire out of it an additional weapon. That's one of the big stalwart R-Type things. And so you're thinking a lot about where that is on your ship. If it's at the front, it means you're defended from anything directly from the front. So you can actually literally ram stuff with it, despite your ship dying to anything touching it anywhere else on its actual thing. The force module was impervious. That you can also pick up what are called bits, which is a smaller spherical thing, which either floats at the top of your ship or the bottom of your ship, and that will absorb and do damage to stuff that it touches from above or below, depending on where it is. And so you're thinking about where they are as well, and so you have this extra protection when you have that stuff. Then you know that you're generally protected on those sides, and it changes the way that you approach otherwise completely linear levels. And then, but the ships themselves, like the the ship that I'm really enjoying, is one of the third ship that you get. You can get it really soon. Is called the R9F Andromalias.
Ooh.
It has a shockwave cannon. That's so good. The shockwave cannon is like a shotgun if you charge it up, and it creates this huge circular area in front in which it just everything is just blasted. For some of the enemies that are particularly strong, you might need 2 hits, 2 charge shot hits, but it means you're popping in and out of cover, kind of going in close, popping them and getting out. It's such a good ship. But there are all these other pickups and things, and each of the different ships has a different take on 3 archetype weapons. There's the red weapon. There's probably proper terms for this stuff, but the red weapon, that's like a weapon that shoots forwards. There's the blue one, which shoots diagonally in some way, and there is the green one. I think it's the green one, and it shoots downward, directly up and directly down. And the Andromalias or Dromalias has this incredible, has this amazing laser for the blue one, which shoots diagonal, where the laser shoots diagonally out from the top. And then when it hits the ceiling of the area, usually there's a ceiling, you're sort of like you're going into areas, so you've kind of always got a ceiling and a floor. Once it hits the ceiling, it bounces directly down. So you're bouncing shots all the time. And it's an expression of the blue weapon in other ships where it might be going diagonally up and diagonally down, and then these these lasers then refract around the level all around you, and like it's there. I've tried out a load of other ones. There's one that I hated for a while called the Shooting Star, the R9D Shooting Star. No, hang on, no, it was the R9E Midnight Eye with the Recon W cannon, and that's kind of like the shotgun that's on the Andromeda, but I don't get it. It puts up this big crosshairs on screen, but things have to be really close into it. It doesn't seem to do more damage. Don't understand that one. And it has the camera bit, which I don't understand what that is in relation to the other bits. The bits of these little tiny spheres which hang up above and below the ship. When you look at the weapon loadouts for all of these ships, you can see they're all different, and I want to find out in what way they're different and what they can do, and that's what's actually powering me through. I'm crap at it, but at the same time, I'm good enough to get through the first level without dying, and means I can fully power up the ship and start to see how it expresses the fundamentals of those three different archetypes and the idea of being protected from behind and below and above and things. But there's so much of the game I'll never see because I'm just not good enough. But it's just weird though, because I don't really know how it's particularly different to Final One, which is an old game now. Maybe it's just, I've read an interesting Twitter thread where someone translated what one of them, the lead, the creative director of the game, had said on a Japanese website, I think, about how it was one of the big struggles behind the game is to make a shooter, like a shoot 'em up game like this, relevant for console players for the modern environment. And it seems to exist in the ships, which you're paying for by picking up. As you go through runs, you're generating resources which you can use to buy these extra ships, some of which are only unlocked when you get to certain levels. And that's kind of, that is a good hook. Like, I want to find out what the 89th ship how on earth they've rinsed something new out of this system, that the 89th ship will be different and worth playing with. But I won't get there because it's too hard for me. But yeah, it's interesting to see a game like this adapt, so deep and rich, being released today.
Sounds like a game I'd almost play for 100 hours, but might just be slightly too irritating and trial and error in terms of ship builds to persist with, especially if there's like lots of resource gathering to be done before you can start unlocking them.
Well, I mean, I think that you can easily. I mean, I picked up the first, 6 or 7. I think 7 ships after maybe half an hour's play.
Oh, okay.
It gets. I think it then slows down. And I think that I think if it's anything like Final was, there are certain secret conditions on which some of the ships will unlock, which is part of the game. Sometimes you'll need to have succeeded at a certain thing or put a certain amount of time into this particular level or something like that. I think that I haven't felt frustrated in the fact that there's lots of stuff that I haven't been able to access yet. It's simply that I'm too shit. And usually, like, most of my deaths are crap. I knew full well that there's an enemy there, and I just wasn't looking there this time. Or, yep, I shouldn't have been sitting there at that point. I know full well I should have been elsewhere, or I should have shot that beforehand, or I missed something. It's kind of kick myself stuff. But yeah, I do find the bounce back from a failure pretty hard.
Maybe I'll get it on the Switch and sort of play it in ad breaks.
Yeah, you could do. Apparently the load times are pretty slow on Switch. I would warn you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that warning. I hate that.
Graham. What have you been playing?
I've been playing two little things, so they shouldn't take long to chat about. But the first of them is Catacombs of Solaris Revisited. Are either of you familiar with this, or with indeed the original Catacombs of Solaris?
I don't think I am.
I've never visited them nor revisited them.
Okay. So the original was like a little game released on itch. I think it might have been free or pay what you want anyway. But the Revisited is like a remaster of the same idea that came to Steam sometime over the last year. And what it is like it's a first-person game set in a maze where the walls have like a repeating colored pattern on them. And you walk around the maze, and every time you stop, what you see on your screen is then applied to the walls around you as a texture. But also, but then the geometry changes at the same time. So it's not just like applied to the walls around you as a texture. It's applied to the walls around you relative to the position you're standing in at that moment. So you'll be walking down a corridor. You turn and look at a wall and pause for a second. And then when you start moving again, what was previously a wall and what still looked like a wall up until the moment when you started to move is no longer a wall. It's now a corridor because it has blurred the lines between the 2D and the 3D essentially. Like that's it. That's the entire game. Like the game is purely about that experience of messing with your sense of perspective, where when you stop and when you look and when you move, you can't tell initially whether you're looking at a 2D flat plane or a 2D image spread across like a Channel 4 ident from the 90s, spread across a set of walls to make it look like it's still like a 2D image. And then you move and realize, oh no, actually it's 3D and the shape of it has changed. And like I say, that's it. The only other thing it's got going on is there is a set of filters that you can apply via the menu screen, like mutators. Essentially, you think of them as like from Unreal Tournament back in the day, which changed the way that the image on the walls warps. So like there's one that makes the colors in the pattern on the wall kind of bleed together as you move and turn, almost like watercolor, and then that therefore because you can stack these images. So like, let me describe this. You look at the pattern, it'll change the textures on the wall to that pattern, and then you'll turn and you'll move around, and that pattern will be spread across, and so you can pick a new spot and look again, and then your image at that point is applied to the walls. But every time you do it, you're changing the texture on the walls, and so you can do this 6-7 times in a row and radically change the wallpaper around you, essentially, so that when you then apply these mutators that cause like colors to run together or change what colors you're looking at or the type of pattern, or you can upload custom images, so you can stick your own photos up there and it'll make patterns out of that. You can like that becomes like the kind of mini game when I'm playing this. Like otherwise it's like it's playing in quotation marks in its strongest sense. This is just like a toy to play with your sense of perspective. But like it's the thing that I'm thinking about is, can I make a visually appealing pattern, or can I take this pattern which has so many colors and looks like a visual migraine, and can I actually position my view 6 times and make it just be a single color that's across all the walls? And it's really interesting thing to play with. It costs like a few quid from Steam, and I had like an hour's worth of interesting fun messing around with it. So I recommend it.
That sounds mind-bending. What's it called again, Graham?
The Catacombs of Solaris Revisited.
Is there
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, is there any sort of narrative underpinning? I don't know why I'm asking this.
Well,
what's your motivation?
It's got Solaris in the title, which is evokes something at least. No, there's not really a narrative underpinning. Nothing that I found in game anyway. But there is an interesting article about the game and what it's doing, and a community that's kind of growing up around it that we wrote on Rock Paper Shotgun, which we'll link in the show notes. Emily Reed wrote it, and there's people who have been playing this at like game meetups as like an art sport, where there'll be like a panel of judges that will appraise the patterns or the artworks that people are making on the wall within a set time limit. Or their set specific challenges, and like a custom photo is used as the background, and they have to fulfill an objective faster than their opponent and that sort of stuff.
That's really cool.
So people like interesting things are growing off the back of it, even though it's such a small thing and a very niche thing. The other game that I've been playing, so like I said, I played Resident Evil 8 for like 45 minutes and noped the fuck out of there because I was so frustrated, and instead I booted up Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, which is about as far away from Resident Evil Village as you can get, I feel like. Have either of you seen this or played this?
I've seen and read a few things about it.
I've not, and if I'd have seen that title, I would have definitely clicked on it, and then probably bought it and downloaded it.
It's a kind of like cutesy, very indie, top-down Zelda-like, I say, in which you play as Turnip Boy, and you're in a world where everyone around you is a vegetable or an animal. The animals are the enemies, and you aren't paying your taxes, basically. And the mayor of the town, Mayor Onion, I think he is, he's upset about this. And Sin basically says that you have to be his assistant in order to make up for the fact that you're not paying your taxes, and sends you off on various little tasks around the town to help him. And as you explore the town, you meet more people who need help, and you do their objectives, and that unlocks new areas that let you fulfill your larger objectives and so on. And so it's got this really simple structure to it. It's really pleasing and satisfying to just boot it up and do favors for like 6 people in 10 minutes and tick off like this big to-do list. And like the stuff you're doing will be like, you'll meet a carrot in a field, and the carrot's worried because he's been supposed to be babysitting a baby carrot, and the baby carrot's gone missing, and he's carrying a stool above his head because he doesn't know how to sit in it properly, but he wants your help to find the baby carrot. And so you don't know how to do that, but you assume that sooner or later you're going to stumble across a baby carrot. But as you're going around the world, you'll then find like a deck outside some housing which has like broken stairs, and the character that's next to it will say, "Oh, if only we had a stool we could stand on to help ourselves get up there." And you go, "Oh, I know where there's a stool. That carrot guy has it. I bet if I bring back his baby carrot that he's supposed to be babysitting and he's lost, he'll give me that stool." And it's and the other thing is, like, you're committing tax evasion, but Mayor Onion is obviously evil. And, that's the thing. Everything that you're doing in this game, you're helping him, but you're getting him stuff that makes it seem like he's going to turn himself into the final boss of the game. And he's like a horrible tyrant, and he is just hoarding people's tax money rather than spending it. Turnip, that's the other thing. Turnip Boy doesn't talk. All he does is like, it's either ellipses ... or it's question mark. That's the only 2 things he can ever say during dialogue. But everyone else is very chatty, and I think your mileage may vary as to whether or not you find it funny. I'm enjoying it. I think there are some good jokes in there as you're meeting these carrots and onions and all these different vegetables. But it's very modern indie, like post-Adventure Time. I don't know what like, there's a certain tone. We've talked about it before.
We have done many times, yeah. I think Marsh came up with a really good term for it, but I can't remember what it was. Yeah.
I want to know what that term is, because I keep thinking about this.
It's that super casual or lower cap thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like that. Yeah, it's that. It's not all lower cap, but it's that sort of tone, basically. I mean, I don't want to call it hipstery, because that's what someone terrible would call it. That's why I feel like there's like a better term for it. So I'll have to ask Marsh. But yeah, it's got that tone, and I'm finding it pretty charming, pretty funny. But like I said, I can see how it could also be grating at the same time.
That was a good warning, because I'm getting more and more sensitive to it as I as I succumb to older and older age. I'm terrible, but it's definitely my failing. But it's yeah.
Yeah, it's this sort of mixture of like genuine earnestness, but also intense irony. Like nothing is actually matters. Everything is kind of a joke, but it's got good feels and everyone's nice. And broadly, I like it. It's like there's good things within its like very light-hearted approach to the systems of the world. Like for example, every bit of paper you can read. When you open it up to read it, the only option you have to put it down again is rip, and so and so you'll meet like a potato that wants you to take a flower to a strawberry because the potato really likes the strawberry and wants to go out on a date with her. And so you'll take the flower over to the strawberry, and the strawberry will be like, "Oh, sorry, Turnip boy, I don't really feel that way about you," and you'll respond with ... and the strawberry will be, oh, it's not from you, the flower is not from you, the flower is from potato. Oh, thank God. Well, in that case, here's this like handwritten note to take back to potato, so that to asking him if he wants to go out on a date with me. And you take the bit of paper and you just rip it in half, because that's the only thing you can do with any bit of paper that's given to you. And so like you just take it and you just rip it in half, and the strawberry is just like, oh, well, that seems a bit mean. And then that's it. That's that little quest complete, and you go on about your day. And there's lots of things like that of people giving you rewards and your responses every time to just tear it up. And that's what I mean, where this is a game that's very earnest and sweet, but also everything is meaningless, and it knows that it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And it's filled with not pop culture references, but like internet humor. Like there is a character that talks in like uwu sort of speech.
Can you do it? Can you try it verbally?
No. Everything is quote W's in all the words that shouldn't have W's in them. There's a character you meet who's a video game streamer, and then you'll meet a person who runs like a sandwich franchise, and they really want the streamer to eat a sandwich on the air. Like, although they're all vegetables, and the enemies that you're eating as you travel between areas are snails, and the game explains that the snails are all vegetarians, and that's why they'll attack you if you get too close to them, and that's why it's okay that you're using a sword that you grew from taking your watering can and like dropping it on a sword flower or whatever. Yeah, that's why it's okay. You're killing all these snails and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a very aware of the modern world, even though it's set in a very silly fantasy place. But yeah, I've played it for like an hour and a half. I think in that time I kind of like cleaned out 2 of the areas in the game, and completed probably like 15 to 20 little quests for people, because each of them is so short. It's very poppy, it's very fun, it's very colourful. It's nice. It's a nice little thing.
It sounds really cute. And also, yeah, cute but with a deep sense of maybe sort of existential disinterest.
Yeah, I feel alienated.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions. We've got just one this week. It's from Ross Angus, who writes, "Dear Iris Murdoch's The Sea. That's just the C letter," which is a good joke. Years ago, I aborted a playthrough of Just Cause 2 during the tutorial when I realised that I would be required to murder perhaps thousands of mooks, and the game had not sufficiently persuaded me that they deserved this fate. Can you please invent a term for this grim, wordless pact that some games are required to make with the player? And can you also think of similar games from your past that have elicited an unwanted empathic reaction? Ross, that's a good question, actually.
I can't come up with a name off the top of my head, but the game that I thought of was Ni no Kuni. Like, broadly, I am okay, with video games telling me I have to kill lots of human beings for vague reasons of evil. Like, fine, whatever. um, but in Ni no Kuni, they're all like cute little vegetable people. Like, if you don't know it, this is the JRPG where the animation and the world and stuff were sort of built or designed or concepted, I'm not sure, by Ghibli? Studio Ghibli?
Yeah.
I've never known.
Ghibli, I believe.
Ghibli, okay. Yeah, and so if you've seen any of their films are beautiful, wonderful, soul-enriching experiences. And the game captures a bit of that. Like, it has a lot of heart, really beautiful world, really lovely animation. It's really great to explore. And then you just like the equivalent of having fucking dog fights in the middle of it, where you just like put together this army of cute little spoon wielding vegetable people, and then have them go into sewers and fuck up other vegetable people. And
Don't you capture them? Do you capture them as well and get them to
Yeah.
fight for you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You put together this little army, and you capture them, and then you can feed them ice cream or whatever to keep them happy, and give them little pets and strokes, and make them grow up big and strong, and then make them murder their friends. And it's just not what I wanted from this game. I didn't like, and I get that it's like, no, that's what Pokemon is. Pokemon is creatures that you make fight against each other, and lots of RPGs, especially JRPGs, have some sort of familiars that like you can recruit and follow you around. But in this game especially, I found it really jarring, and I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to make these cute little people fight each other. I just wanted to be friends and hang out in the beautiful Ghibli universe.
I had this I had this continual. I didn't play very much of it, but while I did, I had the sort of sense of Miyazaki, the founder and the main guy behind the Ghibli films, kind of just shaking his head
Yeah.
at what his company had been involved in producing, because he's been. I can't remember any of the quotes, and I can't actually, but I'm under the impression that he was fairly withering about the violence and the way that a lot of games just fundamentally just work on just hitting each other, and kind of frowns on it in his own films. I just like, oh, he must be so disappointed in his company's gone and done here.
He's, I mean, he became an internet meme essentially, because I think we've talked about this even just in the last few episodes. But the video where he gets shown an AI animation of a person walking, but the AI has animated it so it looks like kind of like shuffling undead. It's really grotesque. And there's this clip in a documentary about Miyazaki and Ghibli where two young tech guys excitedly show this to Miyazaki, and they're really excited, and they think this AI stuff is going to be the future of animation, and Miyazaki just destroys them. And the quote that everyone remembers is he watches the video and he says, "I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself." And yeah, you can imagine him watching his cute little vegetable people fight each other brutally in a sewer, while the 10-year-old boy that is the protagonist of the game kind of like cheers on the sidelines for them. You can imagine him having that kind of reaction. And Miyazaki's always been like that as well. Like there's two good books. I think they're called Turning Points, Volume 1 and 2, which collect a bunch of Miyazaki's writing over the years and translate it into English. And it's a bunch of stuff that's never been translated into English before, because he's written articles for like Japanese magazines and comics and stuff like that about anime and manga and these sorts of things. And so I got Volume 1 of Turning Points, and it's basically just it's articles that he wrote in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, when he was like 30 and 40 years old, but he still has that withering old man energy that he has now, where he just like writes an article about mecha anime where he's just completely disparaging about it and says that he thinks it's all trash. It's really good. It's really good.
It's interesting. It's really interesting. I was maybe think about violence in his films, actually, because Ghibli films do occasionally have violence, but now I think about it, it's always everyone's sort of shocked and horrified by it, and it's always commented on. There's a bit where someone gets decapitated by an arrow shot in Princess Mononoke, and his allies around him just recoil in horror at seeing it. It's like, oh yeah, that's the difference between this film and what most films actually do with this type of scene.
He's not like the pure blood Ghibli stuff is not unafraid to show violence, or like he isn't squeamish about violence. It's just sort of like violence is bad.
Contextualizes it much more care than a lot of films do.
But there's also like most of the villains in Ghibli's films are like manifestations of the protagonist's own flaws as a person, and so even where there's violence, like the ultimate resolution most of the time of any conflict is the person not accepting their flaws, but like learning to deal with their flaws and move past them, like, you know. And so like villains in Spirited Away or Howl's Moving Castle, whatever, that by the end aren't villains anymore. They are understood and transformed as the protagonist is. But no, make the little vegetable people fuck each other up. Nothing must be learned.
I think that kind of under the surface moral crisis of Pokemon type games, it exists across multiple genres. So we've played lots of Persona 5 recently. The Persona series is great. It comes from Shin Megami Tensei, and essentially it involves teenage protagonists going into what Persona calls the metaverse, which is a kind of subconscious universe built by the subconscious of the people who have kind of created it. These are populated by shadows, which are demons. But the demons have a lot more kind of autonomy and personality and implied lives than the game ever needs to give them. And in Persona 4, which is on PC, is actually a port of it's Persona 4 Gold, and it developed from the PSP version, I think, which used to be a handheld game. Persona 5 probably isn't going to come to PC, but Shin Megami Tensei 3 Remaster is coming to PC this month, the month of May, late May. So it's worth, if you're interested in this sort of angle on the Pokemon genre, a kind of quite darkly grim, but also with a kind of dark sense of humor to it as well, then it's definitely worth checking that out. So the thing about these demons is that you fight them, and when you get them in a down state in Persona 5, you can run up and hold them up at gunpoint, and then you can initiate a conversation with them. And if you gel with them and you give them the right answers and sort of match your personality with theirs and kind of find some common ground, then you absorb them into your mask and you can use them. You can fight with them like Pokemon. But in order to get more powerful persona, you quote unquote fuse them with other persona. In Persona 4, this was represented by playing cards which glow a bit and then turn into a different playing card. You think, oh, it's just tokens, it's fine. Persona 5 takes a very, very different approach to this, where there's an extended cutscene whenever you fuse together two different shadows, different demons, in which they are led to separate guillotines, and then their heads are chopped off and they merge into one being. You can also itemize them, which involves covering them in a sheet and electrocute them in an electric chair. There's also, you can do triple executions to create one even more powerful persona. There's a thing you could do to them that involves hanging them off, and it embodies these creatures that you're fighting with and that you've actually persuaded on the battlefield to join you. It embodies them and then destroys those bodies and warps them, physically fuses them together in a way that is much more challenging, I would say, than other games that play with this sort of Pokemon genre of like, oh, it's just a game about card collecting, or oh, you fill up your Pokédex, and then this actually no. I mean, you could do an essay on, is Charizard, what happens to Charmeleon when it turns into Charizard? It's implied that it's a totally different person. So have you killed the other personality that was Charmeleon? And Persona 5 is basically got that all over. Like it's constantly sort of nudging you. One of the characters in your party is a cat that talks, and it's certain it used to be human and has been cursed to be living cat form, but also it might actually just be one of these demons that's escaped the Shadow Realm and just joined humans as a cat. Very good.
It's interesting. The cool thing about it's funny you say it, because I actually went back to it after having not played it for about 2 years just last night, and I'm just trying to relearn all the kind of what things mean. Like, oh yeah, what is the metaphor for just making new new things to fight with. Oh yeah, guillotine. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
But it does set up like it's really interesting that it kind of. So I was just wondering about what the name is of the pact. It is like the blood pact, isn't it? Where you feel better about executing the demons because usually they've been arseholes to you during the battle when you've been trying to recruit them, and they're really nasty. They're just like insulting and sassy and generally kind of really dismissive of you. So you know the little mini game being that you've kind of got to figure out the best way to get them to be impressed enough to join you. So you already have a relationship with them of a sort, which is quite a neat thing. That's the blood pact that it puts you into. I was just thinking as well about maybe think about. Do you remember that game Kenshi? That sort of very open-ended RPG sort of game in which you're in this sort of very complex sort of world of different factions, and it's brutal game where you can die very easily of many different afflictions and enemies, and it's kind of janky as well, but it's really very interesting and sort of bizarrely detailed in the way that it renders violence and things. But in that one, like because all these different factions, you're always fighting against other humans and kind of fantasy creatures as well, I guess. But you always have like beef is like because they've been nasty to you in the past, and like the blood pact is formed by this sort of systemic in a systemic way where all through this run that you've been on with your character, you've been assailed by people more you've been punching down at you all the way through, and when you get into any fight you really have a lot to prove, but you need to survive for one thing, but also screw those motherfuckers, and that's how, like, that's fundamentally what games, kind of violence-based games, have to do. They have to kind of generate a screw those motherfuckers kind of sense in you. Like Kenshi's is, like actually every faction you could completely ally with any of the factions, but you generally hate all the ones that are against you.
Can you think of a name for the ludonarrative deadenance that he's talking about?
It's just the blood pact.
I wonder how much they need, like, a game needs to say to you to invite that response. I think we're quite well trained by games just to accept enemies as enemies and not really think too much about your motivation.
Then you get The Last of Us or something like that, where
you get lectures.
Where it's sort of but obviously that's partly what the game is about, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, of course.
And it makes it hard to play a lot and questionable after you finished and things. But I think that like there's got to be a lot of show don't tell, or like don't be told, I suppose, is the game equivalent of that, where you have to create your own relationship with the enemies for that to be effective. Because for as long as you're just told that the others are baddies, that only goes so far, especially as games try to be a bit more complex.
Yeah, I think the Spec Ops line invited lots of op-eds because it's a game that appeared from the outside to be a totally conventional genre piece that did actually try to complicate the relationship between you and people that you were doing war crimes on.
But also wanted you to shoot them.
Yeah, and also the shooting was really fun. Made really good shooting. Video games. Miyazaki, can we ever persuade him? Is there anything anyone could say to Miyazaki that would encourage him to just play a bit of Animal Crossing?
He'd be so scathing about it.
I'd love that. I'll say in a second.
Well, thanks for that question. That's it for this week. You can hang out with us in our community on our Discord channel. You can find the address of our Discord channel on our website, which is at Crate and Crowbar. If you have a question for a future episode, you can send to us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or you can tweet at us at Crate and Crowbar. You can also listen to this episode, perhaps you already are, and previous episodes, and various spin-off podcasts and projects on our YouTube channel, which is at, I don't know, is it youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar, or is it used? I don't know. So you can find it. You can find it. Crate and Crowbar is kindly funded by our Patreon backers. If you'd like to know more about supporting the podcast and all our bitty spin-off bit projects, it's Crate and Crowbar. Oh, no, patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. I think that's all the things.
I think
it remains
so
for
too.
me to say. I have been Alex Wiltshire in a slightly dazed and confused state.
I've been Graham Smith, making tiny vegetable people fight.
I've been Tom Senior, and next time I'll find a game I like to talk about.
Yay!
Woo.
Thanks
Thanks
for listening, everybody.
everybody.